Lucas Carter had always chased the truth, no matter where it led. As an investigative journalist, his specialty was unraveling mysteries, especially those that people wanted to forget. So when an anonymous tip landed in his inbox with nothing but an old, yellowed photograph of a decrepit orphanage and the words, "Find the children," he was hooked. St. Mary's Home for Children had been shut down decades ago, and though stories of abuse and neglect had surfaced over the years, nothing ever came of them. What intrigued Lucas most was what followed. Families who had adopted children from St. Mary's reported that within months, their children had vanished without a trace. No evidence, no leads, just silence. As for those who remained at the orphanage, they were never seen or heard from again after the place closed its doors. Lucas arrived in the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a sickly shade of orange. The orphanage stood at the edge of town, its Gothic architecture looming like a specter over the landscape. It had been abandoned for over 30 years, yet something about it felt occupied. He stepped onto the cracked pavement leading up to the entrance, his breath visible in the unseasonal chill. The townspeople had been tight-lipped when he asked about the place, their eyes darting away at the mere mention of St. Mary's. He was alone in this. With a deep breath, he pushed the front door. It groaned open, revealing a darkened hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and the faint scent of mildew. The silence inside was suffocating. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside, the beam catching dust particles floating in the air like lost souls. And then he heard it, a whisper, a child's voice. "Mother is waiting." Lucas followed the whisper into the main hall, his heart pounding against his ribs. His rational mind told him it was the wind, but deep down he knew better. He made his way to what had once been the director's office. The desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, but one thing stood out. A small wooden box sitting perfectly upright on a dusty shelf. Inside were old cassette tapes, labeled with names he didn't recognize. He picked up the first tape and placed it into his recorder. Static crackled before a soft, trembling voice emerged. "My name is Daniel. I don't like it here. Mother watches us at night. She tells us stories, but they don't make sense. She says we belong to her. I don't want to belong to her." Lucas's blood ran cold. He played the next tape. "Mother has long arms. She touches us when we sleep. She whispers things we can't remember when we wake up. The others are leaving, but they don't come back. I heard Sister Agnes crying. She said we were never meant to leave." The voice broke into quiet sobs before the tape cut off abruptly. Lucas rewound the tape, his mind racing. Who was Mother? A caretaker? Or something else entirely? A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, flashlight shaking. But there was no one there. Determined, Lucas searched the orphanage room by room. He found old beds still covered in dust, broken toys scattered across the floors, and eerie drawings on the walls. Children holding hands with a looming black figure standing over them. In the basement, he discovered a locked door marked "Staff Only." Took some effort, but he managed to break it open. Inside, rows of small beds lined the walls. Crude restraints dangled from their sides. The room smelled of decay and something worse. Something old. At the center of the room stood a single crib, untouched by time. Inside was a tattered doll with button eyes. As Lucas reached for it, his recorder suddenly crackled to life in his pocket. "You were meant to come here." His breath hitched. The voice was different this time. Older. A woman's voice. A sudden knock echoed through the room. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Then silence. Lucas turned, but the doorway was empty. Every instinct told him to run, but he had come too far. He played another tape, his hands trembling. "Mother needs more children," a child's voice whispered. "She is hungry. She doesn't like when they leave. She makes them stay." The tape distorted, warping into something unnatural, before cutting out entirely. Then something moved in the shadows. A tall, skeletal figure stepped forward, its form flickering as though struggling to remain in this reality. Long, thin arms extended outward, and its face. There was no face, just shifting darkness. Lucas stumbled back as the entity glided toward him. The air around him grew heavy, suffocating. Whispers filled the room, overlapping voices of children crying, pleading, "Join us!" They wept. "She is waiting." The figure reached out, its elongated fingers grazing his shoulder. Ice shot through his veins. He felt himself slipping, his vision blurring as if being pulled into something far beyond comprehension. He screamed. The world went dark. When Lucas awoke, the orphanage was gone. Or rather, he was gone from it. He found himself standing in a field where the building once stood, his camera missing, his recorder melted into an unrecognizable lump of plastic. The town of Black Hollow had no record of St. Mary's. No one remembered it ever existing. But Lucas remembered, and so did they. That night, as he lay in his motel room, unable to sleep, a whisper tickled his ear. "Mother is still hungry." His reflection in the mirror smiled, and he did not.